So we are talking to Nick Landry, who's the publisher of Space Kids Kickstarter, which is going live. I'm Ben, here for Garblag Games. All of our details and information will be below once this recording has gone to our glorious overlord for approval. We wanted to talk to Nick because he's got a live Kickstarter going right now, very, very close to reaching its goal. So, Nick, first of all, welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us about Space Kids.
Space Kids. Wow, how long do you have? Okay, so first of all, it's a tabletop role-playing game, but unlike most tabletop role-playing games out there, this one is targeted specifically at kids and their parents. So it's targeted primarily at a pretty wide age range of 4 to 12 years old. So the idea is to take them when they're really, really young and turn them into like passionate gamers right away, and take them all the way up to maybe like 10, 12 years old. The reason why I put the cutoff at 12 is because there's a certain role-playing game that's been played for the last 40 years that's very, very popular, and the recommended age for that game is 13 years old.
I think I've heard of it.
Yeah, something
Dungeons and Dudes or something.
Yeah, D something, yeah. So D&D basically is recommended for 13 and higher. And I know there's kids that play it younger as well. So I wanted to create something that could kind of bring up the kids in the world of tabletop gaming and tabletop RPGs. At the same time, I mean, I'm not the only one doing this. There are other great games out there. Not a lot, but there's a few great games out there for kids. And I don't mind talking about them either. There's like Hero Kids, there's Amazing Tales, there's No Thank You Evil from Monty Cook Games. All great games. I've even played, I own all of them. I've even played one so far with my kids. But none of them are dedicated to sci-fi. That's the thing. It's like
purely research, obviously.
Yeah, so I love sci-fi. I mean, I have I actually brought my stack with me, but I have a giant stack of sci-fi tabletop RPGs. I love fantasy. I play D&D. I play tons of games, but I just love sci-fi so much. And while some games for kids kind of dabble into sci-fi, I really wanted something where we can be dedicated to it. You know, basically, let's make it sci-fi. Some people have even asked me, like, hey, you've got this custom rule system, the Glory rules. We can talk about that later, but are you going to adapt it to other genres, you know? And I'm like, well, I could, but you know what? There's already other games out there that cover fantasy and pirates and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I'm gonna focus on space travel and weird aliens and to boldly go where no kid has gone before, you know?
Yeah, completely with you. Love a sci-fi game myself. We played a bit of Traveller and Star Trek on the channel, so plenty of fans. Do not stand there, cat. You're
yes,
right
I was going to say, speaking of alien, there's like there's a feline alien right behind you. So.
Typical. Very professional operation going on right here.
It's okay. I mean, we're just a bunch of nerds talking about games, so seriously, what are people's expectations here?
So like we were saying, your Kickstarter is past 95% now, cruising up on 100%. You've got 10 days left to go, and you're just a tiny little bit shy of your goal. So what's your elevator pitch? If you could elevator pitch it in like 30 seconds, it's a really short elevator ride. Why should people back you right now?
Okay, so first of all, it's for kids. You want to bring in kids right away, turn them into gamers. Let's use sci-fi to also teach them good values. So the beauty of science fiction is there's a part of that that's called science. Science is educational. Space Kids RPG is actually an educational game where we teach people about, of course, it's going to help them with reading and writing, but also numbers and counting and math and probability, understanding that if you roll a D8 against the D6, then you have a higher chance of getting a higher score with a D8 than with a D6. But of course, we're going to talk about astronomy and space as well, learning that, I don't know, the Earth is actually a sphere. I can't believe that in 2020, we still have to tell people that the Earth is not flat. So let's make sure that we confirm that with the kids from a very young age.
Yeah, there's some terrifying numbers on that.
Yeah, let's not even go there, but astronomy, space, orbits, all the stars are basically just other suns out there. A planet can actually be a giant ball of gas and not necessarily just a huge hunk of rock. Cool things like this. But also, we're going to use aliens as well. And the aliens are there. They're our friends. and we can actually play as an alien. There's a bunch of fun aliens we can play as. And the goal of using the aliens is also to teach kids about diversity. How the bottom line is, it doesn't matter what their friends look like, how many legs they have, how many eyes they have, or at the same time, what is the color of their skin, their physical features, their religion, their culture, their beliefs, gender, identity, age, or even ability. So if a kid is playing as a robot that's using like tread wheels, they might not have the same capabilities as another kid who has 6 legs, and vice versa, you know. So the robot is going to be able to do things that the lobster folk kid is not going to be able to do. So I believe in a diverse world. I believe that kids, let's just say, prejudice is something that's not, you're not born with, it's acquired. It's usually, unfortunately, circumstances of their environment. So I believe in teaching kids the right thing right from the get-go. So let's teach them science. Let's teach them that diversity is good. But at the same time, let's have fun. It's a game for fun, for sure.
That's fantastic. I mean, purely on the diversity angle alone, you'd have sold me then and there. That's really, really good. I mean, I do know that certainly on Twitter today, there's been a lot of talk about the lack of diversity in the role-playing community and the lack of awareness of the range of people that are involved in gaming. So getting kids started from a very early age is fantastic. I've been in education for 15, 16 years myself. So all told, in that time, I probably got somewhere in the region of like 1,000 kids into D&D because I teach at a secondary level, and then branching out from there. But this is something I could actually see playing with both of my kids. My youngest is 7. And, you know, she's smart, she's capable, she's keen. She loves to get stuck in and see what's going on. But this looks perfect for that. So tell us about your gaming history. When did you start and where did you come from in the game?
Oh boy, that's an interesting story, actually. I mean, like a lot of people my age, I'm in my 40s now. I grew up in the early 80s. That's when I discovered D&D. I know it came out in the 70s, but it's pretty much in the early 80s as an early teen that I discovered it. My very, very first version of D&D was the orange box. So I had the basic set, I had the expert set, both in French, actually. For those that are still trying to pinpoint my accent, I'm actually French Canadian. And back then I could not really speak English, and I could barely read it. So D&D has actually helped me learn English. Of course, what's interesting is I kept looking up these words in a dictionary that normally, like when you learn a new language, you don't necessarily look up, like what's a portcullis and what is a chainmail and all these things. So these are the kind of words that I learned before learning something more utilitarian inside of a regular conversation for every day. So I started playing this. I started playing. There was also a game, you know, the Black Eye, Dark Eye or Black Eye. It's a German game, and it was translated to French. Called L'Œil Noir. So I played that as well. It was kind of a derivative of D&D Basic, where you don't play as you don't say I'm going to be a dwarf warrior or a human wizard. You are either a dwarf or an elf or a rogue. You know, so basically class and races were kind of mixed up.
Like the original D&D, where
exactly.
elf was like a cross between being a fighter and a wizard.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a resurgence of this right now as well. Games like DCC, for example, are like that as well. So I love OSR games as well. And but anyway, so I played those games back then. Then there was this one game that I also discovered at a time, which I also had in French. And now that I bought again, because I was absolutely in love with it. And this one I have to show it because it deserves credit. And it's this guy right here. So this is actually a reprint from DriveThruRPG, and that's Star Frontiers. And I just love Star Frontiers. And anybody who looks at my Kickstarter page and the cover and everything and looks at the cover from this game as well might see a little bit of a similarity in terms of inspiration. So the cover for Space Kids is definitely a tribute to the Star Frontiers cover, but with a Space Kids angle, like more aliens, fewer white people on it, and with a more of a style, of course, that fits for Space Kids. So back in the day, I played D&D, then I switched to AD&D, first edition, second edition. I played some Warhammer, first edition. I played some Shadowrun First Edition, Gamma World Third Edition, Star Frontiers, Le Noir, and eventually Star Wars West End Games. We all remember the D6 Star Wars game. And so those were most of my games. And then I played a lot of second edition D&D, AD&D until 2001. And I know the exact date. It was February 2001. So basically 19 years ago that I stopped playing. You know how it is. People grow up, go to college, get jobs and everything. And that was my last game. It was mid-campaign. I was the dungeon master. And I had all my notes. I actually found my notes, and I had all the dates with a game log of what had happened in each session, and I could see the date right there. It was actually February 20-something, pretty much around now. But in 2001, that was my last D&D game. And then I went away for 17 years. I skipped like all those years. I moved from Canada to the US, met my wife, got married, a few more job changes and everything, focused on my career, started a family. And it was back in 2018 that I was seeing some humble bundles for like some PDF bundles like Pathfinder and stuff like that. I really wanted to play those. I had bought a few books over the years, but I didn't have a chance to play. Didn't even know we had online tools for this, even though I'm a tech guy, I'm a software engineer by trade. And I should have imagined like, hey, yeah, we have things like Skype. We could have used this for playing online, but I didn't know there were communities yet. And then I heard about this little show called, what's it called again? Critical Role, I think.
Yeah.
And then I started watching that. And then I was watching it and thinking like, oh man, I want to play D&D again. So I went online before even having a party or a group of friends or anything. I bought the whole legendary bundle from D&D Beyond for all of the D&D 5 ebooks. And then I discovered we have digital tools for this now. And this thing called Roll20, and this is amazing. So I made a great comeback. There's some friends that I met at a conference that became now very, very, very close friends of mine. We're all a bunch of nerdy dads. And most of us have either currently or in the past worked in the gaming industry as well. So we all relate as well. And all love D&D. I heard they had a game going. And I begged and pleaded on my knees, like, please take me in. And they did. And it's been like a wonderful 15 months now since I've come back. And in those 15 months, I've been pretty much making up for lost times. I've played well over 100 game sessions because, yes, I'm a nerd. I keep track. I've played D&D 5th edition, Zweihander, some Starfinder as well. We even started playing Star Frontiers again. That's awesome. And I've played, I went to Gen Con. I played some Shadowrun 5th edition over there. Zweihander as well. Zweihander is a great game, by the way. I don't know if you've ever played it, but it's kind of it started as, oh, you have it back there?
Yeah.
Oh, very cool. Oh, yeah, Zweihander is an awesome
a good game.
Good OSR. That started as an OSR retro clone of Warhammer 2E, but then it took a life of its own, and it's really its own game now. That's the cool thing. I don't want to think of it as a retro clone or anything. It definitely is its own game. So
we have a few live plays on the channel dotted around.
I love this game, and I wish I could play it more. I'm trying to bug my D&D group, like, guys, we have to play more Zweihander. Anyways, and I know that I say it kind of like the way you're supposed to say, like Zweihander, even though Daniel Fox, who's the creator of Zweihander, is become kind of a good friend now, and he keeps using the American like Zweihander for it, and I love it. So anyway, so yeah, that's basically it. Lots of games, a 17-year gap in the middle, and now trying to make up for lost times. And after all this time now, I'm actually creating my own. In fact, Space Kids is actually my second tabletop RPG that I've started. This one I'm going to finish right now, though, because the other one I kind of put on hold. Yeah. But it's, I don't know if I have it here, but there's this thing right here that I started doing. And it's called Star Pioneers. I shouldn't really reveal it yet, but anyway, I just did. And it's kind of like a spiritual successor to Star Frontiers. But that's something that's going to come at a later date. It's a much, much, much bigger labor of love. I've already written enough of it to playtest it. I've playtested it with my friends. It's a cool D100 system, evolved from the Star Frontiers rules, but I'm basically building like something for mature gamers anyways. But
okay, so that's a serious history.
Sorry. There's a lot of
history
stuff there,
in game there. Lots and lots of stuff. Okay, that's all cool. So let's come back to Space Kids, Star Kids.
Yes.
You're confusing me now with your
Yeah, Star Pioneers,
Frontiers,
Space
Star
Kids
Pioneers,
RPG, yeah.
Space Kids. You have kids of your own, am I right?
Yes,
Kids?
I have twins, which means it's a miracle that I'm not exhausted all the time, because I
Yeah.
pretty much am. I mean, I have a full-time job. I have, I mean, I wish I could work on this full-time, but let's face it, it's not really realistic for most
Yep,
people.
don't we all?
Yep. So you never know. I'm basically building my retirement career here, but you know, maybe 20 years early, and so I can continue when I retire. But yeah, I have kids. They're 6.5, and they're wonderful kids. My wife is a little discouraged because I'm really turning them into like little carbon copy nerds of myself. So
An admirable goal.
Yep. One day before launching the Kickstarter, I was watching Star Wars: A New Hope for the very first time with them, and they were just like flipping out and having fun. And when the Death Star blew up, they were just cheering everywhere and running across the basement media room and everything. And so yeah, it's fun. We've played tabletop RPGs. We've played so I basically played Hero Kids with them so far, and then I've also played board games as well that are made for kids of their age. And that was also one of the reasons why this started, because I was like, having played some board games and games for kids with them, and then I was looking at what I'm building for adult tabletop RPG players, and I was thinking, I've got this great universe here. Why don't I just bring this to kids right now? I can build this. I can do this. And then I started designing rules and something that's very, very simple for young kids to pick up. So I basically have my first 2 playtesters right here in the house.
Convenient placement.
Totally.
Okay, so tell us a bit about the system. It's a multi-dice system, isn't it? Polyhedral, all of the full set. And that's good, because I know from experience that there's nothing kids love more than rolling dice. I know at school when I'm running games, quite often I have to say, please stop rolling the dice until we actually get to a point where we need to.
Yeah, that was actually, so the way I design games, and I've designed video games as well. I don't have like an extensive publishing history or anything, but in any creative project, I think it's important to have design principles. So before actually designing this, my design principles were very focused. So first of all, I wanted something that would be simple and fun for kids, for sure. And then I also wanted to have something that the kids would discover the joy of rolling dice. There's great games, as I said, out there for kids, but most of them use the D6s only.
Mm.
And I know they're very easy to get because, you know, you buy other board games, they come with D6s and everything. But come on, this is 2020. Getting a set of polyhedral, I can never say that word properly. Polyhedral dice is not hard. Just funny story. Last year, when my kids were still in kindergarten, they at Valentine's Day, so basically a year ago, they had to bring like little knick-knack gifts for all their friends in the class. So, and you know, usually you get these little kind of knick-knacks things you just throw in the garbage right away when they come home with these things, these little like 25-cent plastic toys, the kind of things you get at McDonald's with the Happy Meal, you know? And I had an idea. I went online, and I still have some here actually. And I bought like all these like packs of dice on Amazon.
Pound of dice, spectacular, yeah.
You know, but they're all like grouped up in colors and everything, and they basically end up being about $2 a set. So that was perfectly in our budget. So kindergarten last year, a whole bunch of kids came home at the end of their day with a bunch of polyhedral dice that my kids gave them for Valentine's Day. And I was kind of hoping that some nerdy dad somewhere in town would recognize those and then say, like, who gave you this? Yes, exactly. Who gave you this? I need to meet that dad. And sadly, no takers. So anyway, my kids they come to my office, they see all the dice that I have. I even like 3D printed my own like book holder, to carry my dice and everything. So my kids constantly come, they play with my dice, they roll them and everything. And I was like, you know what? Kids love dice. And it's so easy to buy them nowadays. You don't have to go to some weird store. You can just order them for a few dollars on Amazon. There's this entire community of people that just love dice so much. And then I'm going to go and sell them like, no, sorry, you're just going to use the D6s. No. But at the same time, there's a flip side where a lot of sci-fi games are very notorious for using these like proprietary dice.
Yeah.
Looking at you, Modifius, but I love Modifius games, but yeah, they have a lot of proprietary dice, and you have to buy those dice specifically. Fantasy Flight Games does the same thing as well. But I didn't want to do that. I figured people already have dice they love. Let's use those. So that was a design goal. Then I wanted something that would be easy, fun, focused on. Also, another value I want to teach the kid is teamwork. That's the cool thing. I've played some board games that are cooperative board games where you kind of play against the game.
Yeah.
Like good games like this, like Race to the Treasure, where you play against an ogre. There's also Cauldron Quest, where you play against the evil wizard. These are good games because they're cooperative. So, and role-playing games are cooperative as well. So I want to focus on teamwork, problem solving, teaching diversity and inclusion as well, like I mentioned.
Yeah, the teamwork angle is something that a lot of kids, I mean, even at secondary school age, they really struggle with the idea of working together. One of the first things they want to do when you put them in a D&D group is turn on each other. I've had a number of games that have ended up being completely derailed. Yeah, okay, here's this fabulous sandbox, open world. You can explore, you can do anything. What do you want to do? I want to stay here and fight my friends.
Yeah, no, that's why if we can teach them young how to get started properly, and so I can assure you that there's no PvP whatsoever in Space Kids RPG. But even more than that, there's also the that's another basic principle of the game, is that there was the educational piece we already covered a bit, but there's also the fact that there's no killing. It's a game for kids, so there's no lethal. There's no killing, there's no lethal damage, there's no one getting badly hurt. So kids are just gonna basically, they're gonna get bruised, knocked down, stunned a little, shaken up, and I call it set phasers to fun. You know, it's basically
the RPG equivalent of kids TV, where when they defeat the bad guys run away or like fall down or go to prison, rather than the RPG equivalent of a spectacular gore fest.
Yeah, exactly. Like, for example, you watch a Disney movie, how many Disney villains have fallen into endless bottomless pits, right? Because that's pretty much the only way you can gracefully get rid of
you're never seeing him again.
Forever. Yeah, no, that's it. That witch is gone.
Until the sequel.
Yeah, or for example, think young Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone.
Yeah,
fighting those bad guys trying to get in the house. That's the kind of, there was kind of slapstick violence, in the movie, but it's not exactly R-rated or even like, was it even PG rated? I don't know. It's,
or even
it's a movie for kids.
The cartoons and stuff that we grew up with when we were kids that were, glorified toy adverts, many of them, but how many times did the Thundercats defeat Mum Ra only for him to come back next week fully refreshed, ready to go? So, that's perfect for kids because it's letting them overcome challenge without having to make these sweeping moral choices about right and wrong.
So these are all kind of the base tenets. Now, in terms of how does the game work in terms of rules, actually, I know you can probably publish some show notes, and people can also see it just by the main Kickstarter page itself.
Yeah, it's right there on the page. It's very, very clear. So and you've got the D4, D6, D8 escalation, haven't you?
Yeah, so exactly. If they look at the day 3 update, where it gets called podcast interview, that was with the different podcasts, and game rules overview, I basically I lay it out very simply. A character, first of all, has 3. I don't want to call it ability scores because they're not ability scores; they're ability dice. There's you basically have strength, agility, and mind. The mind is kind of like, I didn't want to have things like charisma and wisdom and explaining these things to a kid. Mind is basically their mental capacity. I didn't want to say that one kid would be smarter than another, so that's why I don't want to call it intelligence per se. I don't want to insult any kid by having one kid say, well, I have a D4 in intelligence, and or rather you have a D4, I have a D8, which means I'm smarter than you.
Yeah.
So it's more like the mental capacity of the character. So strength, agility, and mind, and then each character is going to start with either a D4, D6, or D8 in each. And it's not like a value that you're going to roll and write a score down. Your die is actually it's an ability die. So I have a D4 in strength. So for example, if I'm a scout, the scout might have a D4 in strength, a D8 in agility, and a D6 in mind. Whereas a medic could have maybe D8 in mind, but D6 in agility. And the way it works is that every time you're going to have to use a skill, you make a skill check, basically an ability. You make an ability check. So the GM says, well, if it's something that's trivial, then you just have to roll a 2. So you roll, for example, give me a trivial strength check. So that means take whatever die it says next to your strength, roll it. So if it's a D4 or a D6, roll it. And if you hit a 2, then you succeed. So equals or higher is success. But then if it becomes harder, that means that certain tasks are almost impossible. Like, for example, if something is very hard and the DC for it is basically a 5, well, if you only have a D4, well, baseline, you're not going to be able to make it, but maybe you have an item that can help you. Some items will help you, give you like a +1. And it's not going to be like a ton of modifiers. So kids in the end are just going to learn how to roll maybe with a +1 or a +2. So the idea is to, even for a 4, 5, 6-year-old, to teach them basic math when they get started. So that's part of the design challenge, the design goal as well for Space Kids RPG. There's other games, for example, they use just D6s, and then it's easy because you roll either 1d6 or maybe you roll 3d6s and you just take the highest score. So kids only identify which number is the highest, which is great for a 4-year-old. But then when you start turning like 6 and 7, that's kind of trivial now. You know which number is the highest. But if you teach them to very quickly, like you see a number +2, that's that. Like 4 + 2, 6. Okay, 6 + 1, 7. You know, the teaching them, or 5 - 2, 3. So teaching them to really like become reactionary, like very fast on adding up numbers and subtracting numbers, and with very low numbers, so it becomes second nature to them. That was a design goal here. So instead of rolling a pile of dice, they're just going to roll one at a time and quickly identify which one's a D4, which one's a D6, which one's a D8. And
I think you've got your expanded system, this glory system, for making it more complex as you go along.
Correct. So the glory
gradual
system,
learning of rules for younglings.
Gradual learning, open rules.
Open rules. I was so
open
close.
rules. Open rules for younglings. So the open rules part is because I'm going to open up the system so that other creators, if they want to create games based on glory, they can do so, or if they want to create adventures for Space Kids. Now, I haven't figured out all the things about if there's going to be licensing or things like that, or royalties or whatever. I want to keep it as open as possible, for sure. So there's definitely going to be some free options for people to use this. Now, in terms of how much liberty you'll have with this, I have yet to define all of this. I'm not a lawyer, but I was raised by one. So, and so the idea is that there's going to be mechanics that we'll introduce along the way. So for example, for the 4-year-olds, you're probably not going to use a lot of equipment with them. So that means these things you kind of like maybe set aside or maybe introduce them very gradually. So when they start like adding numbers and everything, for a 4-year-old might be a little harder. But for 5 and 6-year-olds, it becomes a little easier. And the way that glory rules work is that inside of the rule book, so whether it's either the player's guide or the adventure guide. So the player's guide is pretty much your classic player's handbook, the rules of the game. The adventure guide is kind of think of it as your GM guide, but it has a starter adventure. It's kind of a combination of a first adventure, GM guide, and monster manual all in one in a small zine format. So it's going to give you a starter adventure, some starter characters you can use, and some items that are little cards you can cut out. So I think I have some. Do I have some right here? So for example, if you have like these cards like this, that you can just like print this, you can cut them out, and then you can hand those out directly to your kids. So then it tells them right there on the card exactly what it is.
Okay, and then you can potentially take away the card if the item is lost, rather than having it sat there on a character sheet and making a change. That's a good idea.
Yeah, and then there's going to be consumables as well. Like it could be like a stim shot, and I've got these little icons that I use for this. So of course I was thinking, what is a good icon for a consumable for kids? And then I thought, there's no better icon than also something that's recognizable. And I went with pizza slice. So if there's a card that has a pizza slice on it, that means it's a consumable. Doesn't mean you necessarily eat it, like the stim shot for example, for healing is a consumable, but the pizza icon tells you, hey, once you've used it, you have to give me the card back.
Yeah.
And so I basically introduce rules. So imagine, for example, we said like you can do an ability check. So you need to test your strength. So give me a strength 3 roll. So you have to roll your die, hit a 3. Let's say that this is a harder roll, and now you have to hit a 5 with a d6. But let's say that you have a special item that is recommended for higher age, maybe, and that item says you now have advantage with that die. So that means now you're going to roll 2 of them, and if one of them hits the DC, you can basically succeed. So that's another benefit of using a set of dice where you only roll 1 at a time instead of these dice pools, is that I can introduce the advantage, disadvantage rules, like that's been made famous in some games, including D&D 5e. And this way, but then again, the advantage rules is something that's going to come at a higher age. So every rule in the Glory system will be every expanded rule. I don't like to use the term advanced. I prefer to call it an expanded rule. Every expanded rule is going to be in a separate sidebar. So it's not going to be mixed up in the text. It's going to be in a sidebar. And at the very top of the sidebar, you'll have an icon with an age recommendation for it.
Fantastic.
Now,
yeah.
The age recommendation is just going to be a guideline, of course. Each parent will know their own kid. So they will have to judge if the kid is becoming really familiar with the game and they got it nailed down pretty good. You can start introducing some rules maybe earlier. Or if some kids are getting overwhelmed a little quicker, then maybe just go easy on introducing extra rules. And the main reason for the Glory system this way was because there's great games for kids, but the rules sometimes are so simple that I'm thinking, by the time the kids are like 8 and 9, are they really going to be like that interested in the game anymore? They're going to find it boring. So I want to try to build something more scalable so they can actually play it a little longer and keep them interested in the game before tossing them into an adult RPG.
Yeah, and scalability is a fantastic idea to throw in there because, like you say, there are games out there and they're great for kids who are 4, 5, 6. Once they get familiar with it, the appeal wears off slightly, and you've got to have built up like a lot of attraction to the character and the story. And then you've got a big jump between that and going straight into your more adult RPGs, your D&Ds and so on. So having something that can scale to fill that gap is a brilliant idea.
Well, I guess the jury's still out on this one. We'll see if it actually pans out this way. There's going to be a lot of playtesting. So one thing that's very important for me is that whenever once the campaign ends, throughout the campaign, I'm actually going to open up a Discord server so that the community can start coming in. All the backers will actually have a special channel in there for interactions and feedback, but everyone will be welcome as well. So if someone is not a backer, they can still come to the Discord server. But all the backers are going to get an early draft of the game in a few months. Once I have something that's in a better shape to share it, it's going to be like unedited and no final art or layout, but at least it's going to give them the rules and a starter adventure. So this way they can start playing it. And aside from getting feedback on how the game plays and everything, one of the key pieces of feedback that I need is the recommended age ratings for the different rules.
Yeah.
Because I only have 2 kids, and on top of that, I have twins, so they're the same age. So I can see, for example, like, well, they're the same age. Maybe my son is easier on this rule. He gets it, but my daughter got this one first. So I don't have a big sample size to basically test all of this. And I'm not an educator like you, basically working with kids all the time. So I'm not going to have like a big pool of kids to test with. So it's really important for me to open it up to the community so they can tell me, like, for example, hey, this rule, you recommended it for 8, but we think it should be more like 9. Or another person might be at 7. So I'll gather feedback from surveys, and then I'll try to build an aggregate and build a range. So some rules might have a range or maybe a minimum, but this way I can tweak those values in the game. So it's not necessarily looking for balance issues like this monster should be like a CR4. There's no CR, by the way, but like, like the monster manual, it dice and abilities and everything, and this class is overpowered. There's none of that in Space Kids, of course, but gauging the rules properly by age group, I think, is going to be really important. That's going to be a primary piece of feedback that I want.
Yeah. Okay. All good stuff. One of the other things I definitely did want to ask you about, one of the things that really jumped out at me on the Kickstarter and in the art and just going through it was the originality, especially on the Kritori. Where did they come from? That's a fantastic idea. I loved it.
It's interesting because the artist that I got for this is this wonderful guy in Texas. His name is James Shields, and the main reason why I selected James is, first of all, he has a great set of stock art. So when I started writing the other game that I was talking about, Star Pioneers, I was looking around, and it's not easy to find good stock art that does sci-fi. Because there's a lot of artists that are doing fantasy, of course, especially for D&D supplements, for DM's Guild and everything. But when you start digging through sci-fi, there's not a lot. And on top of that, sci-fi, it's very hard to mix and match art, because you can have one sci-fi style is very different than another sci-fi style. Whereas fantasy, yeah, I mean, it's more compatible thanks to Tolkien, you know, kind of like uniformly created like this fantasy world that everybody borrows from. It's easier. But with sci-fi, some are more Star Wars, some are more, which is technically fantasy, but let's not go there. Some are more Star Trek, some are more Star Frontiers, some are more like alien, horror, sci-fi, and things like that. So James actually has a great set of stock art that I wanted to start using. So I bought a whole bunch of it for Star Pioneers. And then the funny thing is, as I was reviewing the art, there was also some art that he had done. I was like, yeah, it's probably a little too kiddish for my adult game, so I'm going to pass on that one. I'm not going to buy it. But then later, when I revisited the art and I was going for Space Kids, I was like, wait a minute, James has all this cool art that I felt was a little too cartoonish or a little too kiddish sometimes for adult gamers. So now I went back and I bought a whole bunch of that art instead. But as much as stock art is fun, I really wanted something unique, which is why I'm doing the Kickstarter. So if anybody's curious, I'm not paying myself for this Kickstarter. This is my product of love. But my artist is not free, and he's really good, and he deserves to be paid. So a big part of that budget goes to original art, starting with that cover. That one I fronted it because I wanted to have something iconic to show the Kickstarter. So I commissioned that cover from James. And then, but to answer your question, I know it's a long-winded one. In one of those stock arts that he had, there was this bartender, and you don't see his body, but he had a look kind of like crustacean, you know, looking a little bit, and his hands look almost like claws and everything. And I was coming up with new species, alien species for Space Kids, and I kept looking at this bartender, and I thought he looks so cool. And that's when I went to James, and I don't even know if he intended that stock art bartender to have the full body of a lobster behind the counter. But I told him, like, hey, I love this guy, but I want a lobster folk. So basically think centaur, but instead of being a half man or half person, half horse, it's going to be more like of an upright lobster. But I don't want the top to be human. I want the top to be more alien-ish. In fact, one of the early sketches that I got from him for the cover, the Kritori had more of almost a human face on it, which I was like, no, that's not what I'm looking for. I want to go more alien here. So for lack of a better term, Kritori are lobster folk, but I try to avoid using that term because my good friend Dex is from Baltimore, where they're famous for crabs and Old Bay seafood. And I don't want Kritori to be seen as a meal. But I figured, hey, if we can get away with Minotaur, you know, and avoid the cow jokes, I'm sure we can deal with Kritori and lobster jokes. So, but I'm going to give them a cool personality. They basically will have a better defense die, because that's another type of die you'll have. Every character will have a defense die. Most kids will start with a D4, some maybe a D6, but Kritori will start with a D8 because they have an exoskeleton.
Yeah.
So they start with natural armor. And because the idea is that whenever you do combat, we talked about skill checks earlier or ability checks, but when you do combat, it's basically an attack die versus a defense die. So if I attack with this, if my agility is a D8, but your defense die is a D6, then I roll my D8 against your D6. And then if I'm equal or higher, I beat you, because equal is always in favor of the attacker. So that's how things are resolved for combat. And the other thing also is you have a stamina pool, which is your health, if you will. I don't want to use the term health or hit points because nobody really gets hurt in this game.
Yeah.
It's more people get kind of tired of fighting and eventually they fall down and they can no longer fight, or they're either unconscious or too tired. So that's why I use the term stamina for the vitality of the character. So when you get damaged, you lose stamina points. And so yeah, so basically all of that to say that the Kritori are these cool aliens. And the cool thing is that even though there's some species in the game, like the Ishtir, for example, that I introduced in my rules last night for the first time. I mean, they've been designed for a while, but I mentioned them for the first time. And the Austral as well. The Kritori are actually original for Space Kids. So they were not part of the Star Pioneers game that I've been working on for a while, because there's other species in there. Some I might even be introduced later in Space Kids, either via stretch goals if I'm really lucky, or as part of other supplements later. But the Kritori are basically Space Kids original. And then they're going to go back to Star Pioneers later. So that it becomes it's the same universe. That's the other thing also, is as much as I want kids to play Space Kids for a long time, eventually I know they'll want to graduate to something, and they should definitely explore a lot of games. Let them play Alien, The Expanse, and Starfinder, and Coriolis, and all these other awesome sci-fi games out there. But at some point, mine is going to be there as well, so they'll be able to graduate to Star Pioneers and play in the same universe, essentially, with the same species.
It's a brilliant way of bringing it all back together again. So are we going to be looking out for a Star Frontiers Kickstarter in the future then?
Star Pioneers. I wish I could do Star Frontiers. Unfortunately, Wizards of the Coast still holds that trademark. And of course, it's not a copy of Star Frontiers. I'd like to think of it as a spiritual successor to it, but it definitely has. I have my own take on it, and some species are inspired. Like, for example, I don't think it's going to take long for anybody to realize that the Austral that I introduced yesterday as an amorphous species of lizards that can change shape and doesn't have a skeleton is definitely inspired by the Drellicites of Star Frontiers. But at the same time, Star Pioneers is a game that stands on its own. But for now, I don't want to be distracted though. In fact, I've put all development for Star Pioneers on hold, because right now all my focus and energy is on Space Kids RPG. So I don't want people to think that I'll be too distracted. I already have a full-time job and a family to take care of. One project at a time is enough.
One project at a time. I think
and this Kickstarter's
few people on the Garblag boards who would agree with you and point at me or raise eyebrows at me, because I have a bit of a reputation for being a multi-project kind of guy. And
I'm the same. I can't blame you for it. When you're creative, you have these ideas, you want to realize them. But what I love to tie my ideas together, though.
Yeah.
So, for example, as I said, Space Kids and Star Pioneers will play in the same universe. And I even have a video game that I'm working on that is also on hold. And the core system used in the video game is going to be the same that I'm using for Star Pioneers. So anyway, I like to reuse a lot of things. It makes it better this way, by testing instead of creating something new every time.
Well, that way, if you've got a sort of shared universe idea, it does all tie quite nicely together.
Yeah, and I can't wait. One day, that means I'll be able to play Kritori in Star Pioneers, and that's going to be cool. So
that won't be at all intimidating for anybody GMing it.
Yeah, imagine.
By the way, I'm the author.
But it's cool. I mean, I try to picture and the thing is, I when you give these directions, these ideas to an artist, and James just floored me with his talent when he came back with the Kritori, and I don't know if you saw the full shot, because you see the Kritori kind of partially on the cover, where most of the back part is hidden. But if you scroll down on the Kickstarter page, you see the kids side by side, and you can see the full Kritori there with the full lobster tail that follows back there. And when I saw this, I was like, oh my God, this is awesome. Now that's an alien species. This is also my little, I'm a huge Star Trek fan, but it's my little jab at not everybody's a humanoid with a different forehead or a different nose, So, there's going to be some of those, but that's one thing I love about Star Wars. Star Wars has a big diversity of aliens. I wanted that as well. And same thing with Mass Effect, for example. Mass Effect has in a video game has some really, really cool alien species in there. So I'm trying to kind of, I don't want to say borrow ideas, but more like influences. So the diversity of aliens is something that I want to bring. And I think it really ties nicely also with the diversity and inclusion mission of the game as well, which is not just about the color of your skin, it's also how many legs do you have? And do you even have arms, or do you even have legs, or are you rolling around like a robot? So between weird aliens and even robots that could be like any shape, really. Like on the cover, you see a hovering robot. So it's going to be good to teach kids how to, in the end, hey, we're all humans, and it doesn't matter what country you're from, what language you speak, or what God you pray to, or what the color of your skin is. I mean, I live basically in a multi nationality, a multiracial house. My wife is Indian. My kids are half Indian. So that's why the girl on the cover is actually of Indian descent. And although it's not easy to see in black and white, but yeah, definitely. So that's why it's something that I don't just like talk about. I live those values every day.
Well, Nick, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us this evening. There's nothing that can really follow a closing statement like that. That was, your passion for this game is really clear. Your sense of sort of love for what you're doing really comes through in the way you talk. We wish you all the best. Well, we don't need to wish you all the best because you're well past 95% and you've still got 10 days to go. So anybody watching, get yourself over to the Kickstarter. There will be a link in the comments. Push a few pennies Nick's way and let's see just how far he can push Space Kids and how much I can use it at school next term to browbeat my own students into learning teamwork.
I can't wait to get feedback from you and your players. That's going to be awesome. And keep following the campaign. There's going to be more updates as well. So either use the link or just go to spacekidsrpg.com. It's going to redirect you there. I look forward to seeing you online, and the hailing frequencies are open. So there's communication that goes both ways.
Excellent. Well, we'll look forward to joining your Discord. And in the meantime, as I'm honor bound and duty bound to say, don't forget to check all the links below for our Patreon, Discord, YouTube, Facebook, and all of the other things that Pete loves to throw in the links. We were talking about dice earlier and custom dice. So let's not forget to mention Thornless Rose, our good friend who has taken on the building of custom made dice in a variety of wild and wonderful shapes, sizes, and colors. But from all of us here at Garblag and from Nick, thank you very much and good night.